Hey guys, welcome to Sippin' and Spillin' with Sid from 3 Mississippi. I hope you are having an amazing start to your week. I don't know about you guys or where you're at, but we are having beautiful weather. Like it really feels like spring this week. We had, back-to-back storms over a couple of weekends, like some pretty bad storms, and then we had a really cold dip where it wasn't a frost, like we didn't freeze here, but it got down into the 30s. And yesterday and today, gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. It's like 70, 75, sunny, slight breeze. Everything has greened up this week. Everything that we've planted is just really starting to take off. The hummingbirds are coming around more and more. It's just really starting to look like spring out here, and it's so beautiful, and it's just perfect weather. It's really been nice. And yesterday, well, Saturday, today's Sunday, just got back from church, but happy belated Palm Sunday as you see this. Saturday, we had a little bit of a work crew here getting some stuff done. We, you guys know we've been kind of systematically working on fencing for making some holding paddocks and for being able to eventually move the sheep and be able to rotationally graze them, like down in the lower, like 20-acre field down there. And yesterday, the piece of fence line that we call it the woods, it's like a little area where it's really wooded, and it borders our neighbor's property. There was a lot of trees that were kind of like in the fence line, and big branches and hanging and some dead stuff and whatever. So we had Noah, who's a family friend's son, essentially, and Frankie's boyfriend, Trey. And Frankie, of course, came down, and they were working on clearing kind of the trees that were messing with that fence line out. And then Frankie took the grapple and moved all the trees to, there's like a spot that's maybe, I don't know, 50 feet before the culvert, closer to the goat pen, that's kind of like a low spot. So when we get a lot of rain, that gets really marshy and sometimes can like run water through there. So we piled all of the trees and the limbs and things in that. And I think their plan is to kind of compact that down in there a little bit, sort of to help fill it in and make it a little bit more usable eventually, I guess, or just a good spot for it to help fill in. And they were working on that. We were hoping we were going to have time to run the electric line, the hardwired electric line. You know, all the electric lines we have right now are running off of solar chargers that they're hooked to, which work okay, but they're not as reliable. They don't always put out the same amount of charge, so sometimes the animals will test certain spots on it, specifically the birds. The birds are like, their netting doesn't always seem to give as much of a zap, and some of that's because their feathers sort of insulate that a little bit, so unless they touch it with like their face or their feet, sometimes they don't get the zap, and then they can get over it or through it or whatever. So our plan is to run the electric line, a hardwired electric line, from the shop down the shop's line of the fence line down to like the culvert, so that we can tie off of that going into the pasture for the bulk of the rotational grazing. And then we also had our friend Nathan, who you guys may remember has done some of the trench work out here that we did, bringing water to the horse pasture and the 2 goat pens, and then the chicken coop. So, and then we had trenched where the French drain went in front of the shop to help alleviate that becoming a muddy mess as well when it rains. So, which is working Pretty well, I would say. We didn't have the issues this winter like we have in the past, where that basically just becomes a mud pit. And we did add gravel, like when we laid extra gravel here, we took some of the excess and kind of put it along that side. So it's definitely helped quite a bit. I would say it maybe needs a little bit more in there. And there's still some spots in here that are thick. You know, we knew it was going to settle to a degree, and there's spots where it settled more. And we try to drive and park in the different spots a little bit more evenly, but there's some spots that are still a little bit deep and some spots that are a little bit, you know, more compacted and settled and like how they should be. So there's still some areas where we can kind of borrow some from to fill in a few spots. I'd like to put a little bit more in front of like the brooder and the storm shelter. And I'd like to put a little bit more in front of the chicken coop door, because during the rainy season, that becomes slicker than hog snot. And, you know, when you're carrying stuff and avoiding trying to walk in certain things, inevitably I slip at some point over there when it's muddy, despite my best efforts. but, but anyway, he came and trenched all the way from the last spot at the goat paddock, the last goat paddock that we built. We call it the goat paddock, but there's, I mean, it's going to have sheep and whatever in it, and the dogs. You know, as we're moving animals and trying to, you know, rotationally graze everybody, having these different paddocks that I could bounce them to in the meantime in different holding pens is kind of like, I guess you could say like phase one, you know, step one to all of that. Because, you know, as we got like the young ewes that we got, that are a little bit smaller, they're staying in the upper paddock that is completely enclosed with goat wire. So it's not electrified, but they can't get through it. Basically, they can't sneak through it. They can't get through it. They're in there. So having those three as holding pens for different things, because obviously like our ram and or eventually rams and our wether goat, Dan, he's, you know, they'll be in one of those paddocks, and we'll strip graze them in there too, just to keep those paddocks healthy. But it really makes a big difference when you're able to move the animals around and not just have them on the same spot 24/7 forever. You know, it helps with the land's recovery and its ability to regrow its grass and nutrients, and not be having such quite a heavy fertilizer load on one spot, as well as, you know, parasites and things. So getting this next step done of him trenching from that corner all the way down to, it was, I think Mike said it was 1,200 feet that he trenched. And basically it went down, if you can think about it in your mind, if you've seen any of our videos, when you go into that second, past the culvert, into that kind of 20-acre block down there, there's what we call the tree island, and it's kind of near where Frankie got her first deer. There's this random little island of trees where there's a couple little fingers of water that feed into the creek there. Not big, they're only, I would say they're like seasonal, but you can kind of see where they run, and especially from like the aerial view, you can kind of see, you know, where they kind of connect to and go. And he trenched all the way out to that kind of corner. So, and then we laid all of the PEX A, I believe it was PEX A, all the way down from the goat pen tied into that, all the way down to that tree island. So as we're rotationally grazing out there, it's going to make my life so much easier when I'm out there feeding and watering in the morning, because I won't be having to do like I did last year when we had the Cornish out there and I was having to get, you know, buckets of water and take them out there, because that's a pain and it's heavy. Because, you know, water, a big, you know, 5-gallon thing of water is heavy and awkward, and then you got to, the lids never stay on those buckets. They just don't. And so you lose some of the water, and then, you know, when the bigger they get, closer to butchering time, the more they're going through water, especially the hotter it gets. And so you're constantly like out there having to like refill their water, and it was a lot. So now we'll have spigots down there, that it'll be a lot easier to get water to whatever livestock we have down there, which is huge. So that was a big accomplishment yesterday, getting that done, because obviously, you know, even though our flock is small right now, which, you know, start small and grow, that's kind of our thing with stuff. You know, like when we first got here and Mike started his garden, I think he only started with, I want to say it was 4 rows the first year. And then he did like 5 or 6, and now he's got it up to like, I didn't count it the other day, but I know he just added like 3 more rows. I mean, he's got a chunk now. And he's also he tilled a 1/4 acre that's separate from the garden that he's doing corn in. So, as you kind of learn your land and as you're kind of learning the weather patterns and things in your little microclimate area, it's good to start small and build it out from there. You know, that's why we didn't just go out and buy 100 head of sheep and just off to the races, because it's, you know, if you start small and you have a failure or a hiccup, it's a small failure or a hiccup that you can learn from and recover from, versus if you just start off really big and then you really miscalculate something or you overlook something or you know, it kind of helps you stay in check, if you will. So anyway, that being said, this was a huge step in getting us to be able to grow the flock out there, rotationally graze them out there. The next big piece of that will obviously be running the electric line, and getting that done. But I think that's going to go well too, because yesterday went smooth. I don't know, like honestly today, they're still coming back from choir practice right now. We took separate cars because they had to be there really early this morning for an additional choir practice. So I don't know if his plan is to work on that today or if he has gardening he needs to do today. Frankie and I have to head back to church this afternoon because we've got pantry boxes to fill for Easter. But so we'll have a couple hours in between. So I'm not sure if we're going to be working on any of that stuff today, or if that's just what's on the agenda for next Saturday. But I think we're getting closer and closer to being able to do some of those things and get us to the point where we can get everybody out there and everything functioning. Before too much longer, it's gonna be time to start processing some of these Cornish that we have that we're doing out in the front yard this year. I've been moving them every day and they are getting to be little chunkamunks. I did have a weird thing with this batch of Cornish. Now, you know, we built that big new fancy brooder that's mostly done. And it needs a few finishing touches, but this batch, I didn't lose any while they were in the brooder, which is almost unheard of. I think the least I'd ever lost was probably about 2 in a batch one year at that stage. And, you know, there's always a chance when you move them from the brooder to outside, you may lose 1 or 2 just because they go into some kind of weather shock, or you know, then you've also, despite your best efforts, sometimes you still have predators that will try to pull them out from either the underneath, they dig under and get in there, and because it's a mobile thing, there's only so much you can do, and they figure out ways around all your precautions, and it's, you know, it's a thing. But I did lose about 4 or 5 birds. I have to go back and look at what I wrote down, but that I don't know how to describe it. I have never seen this happen at this age of a bird. Essentially, it was almost like a prolapse that they had with their little cloacas, and they were reddened, like reddish, and then some of them, their tails were like, their actual tail nub was, not the cloaca, but the tail nub was almost like they had been picked on, like they were bleeding, which was weird because I'm like, they're not, I was watching them, they were not picking on each other, they were not pecking at each other. It was almost like if the tail grew too fast and split, and it was almost like the same thing happened with their cloacas. And then the one that I found was completely hollowed out on the inside of their cloaca. There was no evidence that anything got in the pen. There was no evidence that any of the other birds like ate it. It was like a weird prolapse, like it just wasn't happy. So that was odd, and it was like every day for like 4 or 5 days there was like one dead bird that had this, and I was like, that's bizarre. But I had noticed it because they were all having kind of issues with their tail area. But they were all healthy, eating, drinking, going to the bathroom. Like they didn't seem to have any issues. So that was weird, but that has stopped, and I haven't had any more issues with any of them since then. So the weaker ones, I guess, but they're getting big and chunky, chunk of monkey. So pretty soon it's gonna be time to start, butchering them. I'd like to, maybe not next weekend, but I think the weekend after, I'd like to, or the week after, set up and process a chunk of them. We do have another batch coming the end of April, so definitely have more to do with all of that. Back in the brooder and back to doing all of that, and then I've got my turkey poults in there. My geese are laying again, so I'm going to be throwing those in the incubator here soon. I've got them sitting aside, but yeah, lots going on. We did get a lot done. It was busy. We've been doing our thing and chipping away at stuff down here. So there's your update for what we did this weekend, guys. I appreciate you. And as always, remember, stay blessed and safety's off.